Hey everyone, I'm David from Boy Studio, and in today's tutorial, I want to show you how to make stylized trees in Blender 2.83. So, I've been obsessed with trees from the Ghibli movies for a long time now, and I've studied for hours screenshots from Princess Mononoke and my neighbor Totoro just to try to understand what makes them look so good. So, I know how hard it is to try to replicate that style in 3D, but after a lot of trial and error, I think I finally cracked it. I'm gonna show you how to do that step by step. It's gonna be a lot of fun. You guys just have to grab a seat and we'll get started. All right, let's get started. So as you can see, I have a fresh of Blender with the default cube, so it'll be very easy for you to follow along. First thing I want to do is subdivide this cube. So I'm gonna click on it, press tab to enter edit mode, and then right click subdivide. And if you go to the lower left panel here, you can bump up the smoothness, add a couple of iterations. And if I jump back from edit mode by pressing tab again, you can change the shade smooth by right clicking here, clicking on shade smooth. So I'm going to rename this to particle emitter. And I'm going to duplicate it with Shift D and call this one foliage. The reason I need two is because on this one, I'm going to add the particle system to it, but I'm actually going to instance it on the foliage here. So I'm going to add a particle system, hide this one, and then add a particle instancer on this one. And the reason we want to do that is because this way you can add more modifiers stacked on top of it. You could displace everything, you could decimate it, do whatever you want, which would not be possible if you were just using the particle system itself. So I'm going to hide foliage for now, go back to particle emitter, and if you go to particle properties here, I can add a new system by clicking on the little plus button. And I'm going to rename this first step. There's going to be two steps for this, but I'm just going to do the first one for now. So you can change the emitter type to hair. Type in a low number for now, so 20 would be good. You can change the hair length to 0. And then the only settings you need to play with is the render as, and change this to object. That way you have this new input called scale randomness, and it will help us vary the size of our little leaves on the tree. So that's it for a particle emitter for now. You can hide it, go back to foliage. And so this one has no particle system to it. But if you use the modifier panel, you can add a particle instance, and then you can pick a particle system. So I'm going to pick my emitter, and then the particle system first step is here. And as you can see, I can see this particle system happening. But the cool thing is I could add anything on top. So I could decimate this. I could, as I told you, there's no limit. It's sort of it's become a mesh I can deform further. So I'm going to click on size here so that it's going to be using the size settings from my particle system. And so if I go here, I can change the scale and the scale randomness that way. So I'm going to add some randomness, make this pretty big like this, just so that I have sort of a weird looking blob. And then I'm going to add a second step. So I'm going to duplicate this one. You can click on the little arrow down, duplicate particle system, and we can call this one second step. Now, when you duplicate a system, by default, it's going to be using, it's sort of a duplicate copy. And if I change setting on one, it's going to change the settings on the other one too. So you want to click on this little number here, and it's going to be making it a single user. So these have now become different. And on the second step, I'm going to type a much higher number. So I'm going to type in 200 to start with. And then if you go back to your foliage, which has a particle instance, I'm going to add another particle instance on top. So what it does is it's going to be using this new blob as a base for the second particle instancer. And the thing that it seeks from the particle emitter is just the position of the particles. But that means that I'm using the first particle instance to generate this weird blob. And then I can use this new blob as the new building block of this new particle system. So it can create some interesting results. I'm going to pick the particle emitter again. This time I'm going to take second step. and click on size again. Make sure that You can control the size from the particle system settings. And then if you go to second step, you can change the size of it. Now, as you can see, it's already starting to be pretty slow. There's a lot of sphere here. So I'm going to go back to foliage on the modifier panel and add a decimate operator. I'm going to move it all the way to the top so that it's being applied on the first sphere before it's even starting to be duplicated a bunch of times. And I'm going to type in a low number like 0.1. So now it should be much more responsive. So if I start playing with the size, yeah, you see it's much better. Now, so if I were to change the number down, you could see what I was telling you, that it's duplicating the first blob a couple of times. So I'm gonna change this to 200. And one thing I might want to do is on both of these systems, on the source, I'm gonna change this to volume instead of faces. That way it's going to be generating the particles inside the sphere instead of on the outside. So change this to volume, and then on the second step, change this to volume 2. So now it's nicely filled up inside. Now, I still feel like this is too uniform. And so the way to fix this is going to be changing the shape of the sphere. So it's going to be casting particles in different places instead of in this very uniform sphere. So I'm going to do this by going to Sculpt Mode. Actually, I probably need to add a couple more polys to this. So I'm going to subdivide this again a couple times. And so this should be enough. And then I'll go to Sculpt Mode. And I'm going to use the inflate brush. You can turn off mirror because we don't want to be painting something symmetrical. And I'm going to change the strength to 2. And now if you click a couple of times, you can start making these blobs on your sphere. It can be pretty random. I mean, it can be really anything. All you want is just to make this shape that's not totally a perfect sphere. And you really need to click a couple of times with the inflate brush to have a good result, because it's only going to start to make this blob once it starts to extrude out. But the first few clicks, you're not going to be seeing much. So you need to click a few more times. That's why I was increasing the strength to 2. So you can smooth things out with Shift if you need. Okay, so it's starting to look pretty good. Make sure it's sort of spherical still. So maybe I'm going to use the grab tool with G and just move this a bit. All right, perfect. So can jump out from the sculpt mode in object mode. And now if you look at this emission here, you can see that it generated the blobs inside those new blobs that we sculpted. And so you have a more interesting shape that looks more like a tree. Now, obviously this still doesn't look like a tree at all. It looks weird with all these spheres. And the way we're going to be making this look a bit more like a tree is by adding custom normals to it. So to do that, I'm going to add a modifier called data transfer. So we're going to be transferring normals from another object. And in our case, the best object to do this would be this new shape that we've built, because it sort of has the shape that we want, but without all the extra little spheres that make it look weird. So I'm going to duplicate this particle emitter. And I'm going to call it custom normals. And you can hide the emitter for now in the foliage. And I'm going to delete the particle systems because we don't need them. And I will add a decimate operator just to make sure that the operation of transferring the normals is not too hard on your computer. And then I'm going to add a smooth operator just to make it It's just a bit smoother than it was. Okay. All right, so you can hide it, go back to foliage, and now in data transfer, you can see it's red because it's missing the source object to transfer the normals from. So I'm gonna pick the custom normals object that we made, and you need to click on face custom normals. And not sure, no, we can't see it right now, but it says here, enable auto smooth in object data properties for it to work. So you need to go to this little green triangle, normals, and click on auto smooth. Now, immediately you can see that it looks much different. It sort of looks smoother, even though there's a lot of details in there. And you'll see better if I jump into my viewport, my best rendering preview. So I'm gonna change this light to a sun, change the strength to 1. And so as you can see, it's already starting to look like something. So it's pretty neat. Now, we want to add some toon shading to this. So I'm going to go to my material panel. So click on foliage, material. I'm going to rename this stylized foliage. And I'm gonna extend this timeline here, press on Shift F3 to access the shader editor, and we're gonna make a simple toon shader. So I'm gonna delete the principal BSDF, click on Shift A to add a diffuse BSDF, because we don't need any of the fancy stuff, we just need the diffuse values. Now I'm gonna press Shift A again and add a shader to RGB. And I'm gonna connect the two here. And I'll need a color ramp. So there we go. I'm gonna click on Control Shift to preview this. Now, I don't know if you're using Node Wrangler in the add-ons, but it's a very cool add-on that gives you some shortcuts in the shader editor, and that's what I'm using. So if you click on Control Shift and it doesn't preview, you just need to go to Edit Preferences, Add-ons, and activate the Node Wrangler. So now if I play with my color ramp here, just make sure that you have color plugged in. All right, perfect. So I'm gonna change this to constant. That way I only have a 2-tone shader. And you can see that it's starting to look like something. Now, I'm gonna wanna add a couple more levels to this. So I'm gonna add a gray one. And I'm gonna move the white one much further to the right. And then I'm gonna add a second darker gray here. Okay. So you want these three to be very close together on the left. And in a way that you won't even see the black one, okay? Because we're going to be using the ambient occlusion to get those details. So as you can see, the more you crunch this, it's going to be getting the perfectly black values from the ambient occlusion. So I'm gonna get some extra details from here. And you can play with the distance here and upgrade the factor if you want to. There we go. And for the white one, as you can see, we're not picking any of it. The reason I'm putting in at the very end of this ramp is because I'm going to use a second light here that's going to be much stronger. So we could call it rim light. And if you go to this light setting, you can bump up the strength to 5. And that way, that means if you only have a standard light, it's never going to be picking up these light values that needs to be super strong. But if you use this light, the rim light, now it's going to be picking out the white, and you can place it a bit angled behind your mesh, so you can pick up these nice rim light from a different direction if you want to. So this is going to be the base of our trees, but it's not actually going to be a tree. It's going to be the building blocks of our trees. So the way we're going to be duplicating this blob is by placing it into a collection. I'm going to do this by pressing M, new collection. I'm going to call this foliage instance. By doing this, you can actually hide this foliage instance. You can now click on Shift right click anywhere to move your 3D cursor. And if you create by pressing Shift A collection instance, you now have this foliage instance available, because it allows you, collection instance basically allows you to duplicate any collection that you have. It will make a perfect instance that's very quick to compute. And so the cool thing is you can make a bunch of these copies, and the only thing Blender has to calculate is the first particle system, and then you can make as many foliage instances as you want, and it really won't slow down your computer that much. So I'm gonna put them all into a new collection called tree. So just press M, then type tree. And I'm going to be picking them all up and scaling them down in the X direction. And this is part of the trick to get a Ghibli look, is that you want your trees to be a bit flatter. And so this technique is really good to generate trees that are further away. If you want to make trees that are very close and you see all the leaves, you'll want to use a different technique, or add more particles to your system or whatever. But this would be perfect to make those trees in the background that has just this 2 or 3 tone shader. So yeah, so you can duplicate these however you want. You probably want to rotate this a bit so it doesn't look too much of the same. And so you can scale them up in the X direction if you want to, but if you want them to be getting a lot of light, you just scale them up in the X direction and you get a big lighted area. So obviously you can still like play with lighting. It's pretty neat. And you have your rim light that you can play with. All right, so let's add some colors to this shader. To do this, I'm gonna use a reference from a Ghibli movie, so we can really pick the colors exactly like on the screenshot to make sure that we're matching it perfectly. So I'm gonna create a new plane, Shift A plane, and let's rotate this 9 degrees, scale it up a bit. And I'm gonna apply a material to it. So just make a new material, emission, change the image texture to this reference here. And I just need to fix the UVs. So I'm gonna place myself in this side view, press tab, and then U, project from view. All right, now we're going somewhere. All right, so this will be a great reference for us as we're moving forward, just to make sure that we're really matching the style correctly. So you can click back on your foliage material. To do this, you can't click on the on these, because these are just collection instances and they don't actually have a material slot. They're just instancing the original one, which do have material. So you need to click on the one that's in foliage instance and to access material. So I'm gonna go back to shared editor by pressing Shift F3. And now let's add some colors. So I'm gonna try to match this tree here in the bottom right, in the top right. So let's pick our white color and pick this bright green. And for this one, I'm gonna pick the slightly darker green. And for this darker one, I'm gonna pick this one. And you notice that even the darker regions are not actually that dark. So there you go. Let me make this one a bit darker. Okay. And this one a bit lighter. All right, so not so bad, right? It's starting to look pretty similar. So if you observe carefully, you'll notice that there's not just one type of tree. There's multiple colors here. There's these darker pine type trees, and then those ones that are a bit greener. So I want to find a way to be able to quickly switch between different colors on your material. And the twist is that I still want to be able to just use this single instance. But you'll notice a problem, which is if you look at your foliage instance, they don't have actual material slot. So you cannot say, oh, so this one use a different material. You actually need to duplicate the entire particle system for each type of tree, which would slow down the computer unnecessarily. So I'm going to show you how you can make this switcher on your material, which will let you use the same, like just one material, and be able to switch between different colors easily. So let's go on your foliage here, and I'm gonna create another color set. So let's just duplicate this with Shift D, and I'm going to be matching this one. So let's just pick the colors. Pick this yellow color here, this green one, and this dark blue. So these ones don't seem to change much. Okay, so if you connect your color to this, and I press Ctrl Shift to switch between the two, you can see that now we have two different styles of trees. But so how do you switch between these two from this scene? So show you how. The way we're going to do this is by using a node called Object Info. And if you see here, there's this input called color. So you might not know this, but there's this property on any object. If you go to Viewport Display, that's called color. And so if I change this here, you won't see much. The way to see it is if you change to Shaded View here and change this setting to Color Object. And that way you can have this just basic gray shading, but apply colors to keep things organized, you know? So when you're in full shaded view, you don't actually see these colors, but we can use this color to affect our material. So I'm going to leave this at white, and I'm going to go back to my foliage, and then let's add a matte operator. So I'm going to press Shift A, matte, and change this to less than. So we're going to be telling it if the value of this color is less than a certain value, then it's going to be switching to a different color. So I'm going to type in 0.8, and I'm going to mix these two by pressing Ctrl Shift right click. And then I'm going to plug this into my mixing factor. So now what happens is if I go to this viewport display color here, if I bump it down, it's going to be switching to the different color set because it's driving the mixing factor between these two. So as soon as it gets lower than this certain value, it's going to be giving either 0 or 1. And so it's going to be switching between these two. So what if you want to have a third set of color? Well, you just need to duplicate this color ramp again and pick the new colors. So I'm going to pick this color here, this one here. There you go. This one's going to be a lot darker. All right, so I'm going to switch between these two. You just mix the third one with the mixing here. So Ctrl Shift right click, and then duplicate your matte operator, put a lower value, and plug this into the factor. So now if I duplicate this again and go to my color property, if I go down, it's going to be switching to the other material. Now it looks weird because I forgot to plug my shader to RGB to the color ramp. So Let me just do that. All right, so I have different colors I can switch from easily. And if you want to change multiple objects at once, you might find that it's not so easy because you cannot select multiple of them and change them all at once. So if you select 2 and try to change it, only 1 will change. So the way you do it is you change the first one, and then you select all the other one, select the one you want last, right click, and then, oops, right click, and sorry you can't see it, but you need to select copy to selected. So that's it. Now there's another thing you can do to tweak the lighting to your liking. So I'm gonna show you how. So let's say you want some area to be more lighted or something, or some place to be darker. What you can do is add some point lights. So I'm gonna show you how to do this. Let's say you shift right click, press Shift A, and add a point light. Now this point light, if I bump up the power a bit, can be used to add some lighting to your trees. And since it's a point light, it's going only to affect what's around it, so it won't affect the other trees. And sometimes you get this weird rounded sphere, so you can just bump up the radius, so it's going to be a bit more random how it affects the thing, the tree around it. And so you can add a bunch of these, because if you observe here on these trees, there's often this very large portion of the trees that are completely in the light. And so sometimes it's nice to fill these top areas with some point light to match the style a bit more. And if you want to add some shadows, well, the cool thing is you can just duplicate this point light. And this is the first time I tried this. I didn't even know if it would work, but you can actually put a negative value in there. So if I put -50, I'm actually casting shadow with my light. It's weird, right? But it works. So you can duplicate this light to add more shadows where you want to. And so you can really easily add light and shadow this way. And so this is completely manageable. Oh, one thing. It's going to slow down your scene a bit the more point lights you add. But if you unclick shadow on all of these point lights, you can add almost as many as you want, and it won't slow down anything. So yeah, that's it. Now feel free to like play around with it and make some additions. So you can, obviously for trees that are further away, it doesn't matter if they are sort of flat, but if you want to have some more perspective to your trees, there's really nothing preventing you from scaling them up like this. Yeah, feel free to do whatever you want with it. Rotate them to make them less uniform, and yeah, that's it. So hope you learned something today. Let us know if you have any questions in the comments, and we'll be happy to answer. And until then, I'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching. Did you know we're also developing an animated series called Dinomancers? We also have a 6-part tutorial series on how to make a full-featured Toon shader in Blender. So if you like our work, make sure to check them out and subscribe to our channel. Alright, take care.